today we have a very special guest on the show. His name is Ross Brodar and he joins us from New York. So I'm going to welcome him onto the show and the channel. Ross, great to see you and hear from you.
Thank you for having me.
How are you today?
Quite well. Quite well, thank you. Yep.
How are things in New York? Is it still pretty quiet, or are things getting back to normal?
Yeah, it's still a little strange, but life's getting back to normal. So it
Excellent,
continues.
brilliant. So there's a special reason why we've got Ross here on this show, and I don't want to tell you that reason right this very second. I want Ross, if you could tell us your story of like your journey, where you started from, what was your early life like, how you got into your artwork and your film work, and that'll lead us nicely up to the encounter with the very important and very interesting character that you met on your journey, and the filmmaking that you did with that person.
Okay. So let's see. Where I would start is I got into quite a bit of trouble as a teenager. And by the time I was 16, I had been expelled from school and ended up in a treatment facility in Manhattan where I
Wow.
was probated for about 3 years. So from 16 to 19 and 19 and a half, I spent my time in like a basically what was called at that time a therapeutic community.
Right.
Um, and during my stay there, I ended up doing art therapy.
Right.
And that was kind of my first introduction to art. And I was in a place that was filled with, a bunch of ex-cons and drug addicts and hookers and drug dealers
Wow.
and bank robbers and all kinds of crazy characters. So, and I was the youngest person ever admitted there. So, from an early age, I was kind of surrounded by a lot of strange and interesting characters, let's put it that way. And art therapy kind of popped into the mix as a way of expression, a positive form of expression. And by the time I got out of there, I kind of hooked up with she was a woman. She was 26 and I was, 18 or something like this. And I developed a relationship with her, and her parents were actually hippies up in the woods in Vermont, and they were artists as well. So that sort of took me on a journey further into the arts. And I found myself, in my early 20s, getting into art and painting and sculpting and doing things like that. And I thought, based on what I was seeing through her father and uncle and some of the people in her life, it seemed like a great way to go through life to just be able to make art and express yourself.
Right.
So there I went on my journey into the art world.
So at this point, I mean, obviously you're a New York guy from Queens. You've brushed up against mob figures. What is your understanding of the mob at this point? I mean, do you know? Are you interested in the mob? I mean, Do you have a good understanding of the mob and how it works? Do you see the mob, in your everyday life and things like that? What are your thoughts on the mob at this point?
At that point, to be honest with you, I had a friend of mine and we had these things called joker poker machines,
Right.
and they were basically gambling machines that would go in bodegas around the city. And mobsters actually had routes that their joker pokers were on. All right. And some places they'd pay the cops off and they'd had their thing going. There were some renegades like myself and a friend of mine who would put our joker pokers in places, and we would hope that mobsters wouldn't rob the machine, bust up the machine, or the cops wouldn't break our machines up, and so on and so forth. Or we were even daring enough to go and rob other machines out of bodegas. We had this whole crazy thing. So I knew about the gangsters, and we were kind of dodging them in our little hustle that we had with the joker pokers. But that was really, I knew some people out in the world that did that, or I knew where they were, or a friend of mine that was a coke dealer, his father was a mobster in Staten Island, but I didn't have any connection to the gangster world, to mobsters. Of course, I knew what they did, who they were. I knew where their families were in Brooklyn or Queens, and there was some gambling spots that the Greeks had in Queens, and so I knew of it, and I just knew to stay away from it as far as possible. It wasn't going to be what I was going to be doing. I actually had a friend that I went to high school with who was sort of born into that. He stabbed somebody, ended up doing like 10 years, and I knew various characters, but I never knew anybody until I met our subject, who I'll let you introduce. Um, I knew nothing until really I met him, and that's when I really started to understand what the whole world was about.
Right. Interesting. Okay. So, I guess we'll so ease into that. So my understanding from our little chat before was that you're at this art gallery or you're doing an exhibition. Is that correct?
So I'm doing an exhibition downtown in Tribeca, and a good friend of mine who I had worked for actually as a bartender. He ran a restaurant down in Soho, an Italian restaurant. Says, "Come with me to this gallery. A good friend of mine who I know you're gonna like is showing his art there. He's a real character." So we go down there, and I see this guy dressed in a suit, slick back hair, smoking a cigarette, with these like really interesting abstract paintings. And I like go in there and I take a look at his section, and like, I go up to him and I go, "Man, this stuff's really interesting." And he goes, "Yeah, it's all shits and giggles." And he just walked away from me. And I'm like, "Who
Wow.
the hell is this guy?" That's the first thing he ever said to me. "It's all shits and giggles,"
Right.
and just walked away. And then later on in the night, he's outside and he's like singing doo-wop in the street with some people, and he's half drunk, and just like, my friend Richie introduces me to him like officially, says, "This is Dominick, and hey, how you doing? We have a chat. This is Ross. He paints too. He lives out in Sunset Park." Now at this time, Dominick was living in Sunset Park with this woman, and he says, "Oh yeah, I live up there too. Yeah, you should come by my studio sometime." Blah blah blah. And that was like our first interaction. Cut to a few weeks later, he gets in touch with me. He comes by my studio, sees what I'm up to, start having a couple beers, start talking. Um, and in the weeks after that, I would go to his studio. He'd go to mine. We kind of like share some stories about art and this and that. And then he starts telling me a little bit about his life. And I'm like listening to some of these stories thinking, is this guy for real? Like, this is some heavy shit he's laying on me, and some of them were, "I'm wanted. I'm this. There's a book about me. Have you ever heard of this?" Now, I had heard of Murder Machine through my tattoo artist, because my tattoo artist read it and had told me about this book way
Right.
before I met Dominick.
Right.
And then I'm like, "Oh shit, this is the guy." And I guess a couple months go by. The woman he was living with was kind of nuts, and they had a really tumultuous, bad relationship. He was drinking like a fish. And one day he says, "I got to get the fuck out of here. I can't stand it here." He says, "Can I come live in your studio for a couple weeks until I get my shit together and figure out where I'm going to go? Because I just can't do it." So I said, "Yeah." I had this big loft above a warehouse in Sunset Park, down in the industrial section, no neighbors. And he comes for 2 weeks, and he stayed for 2 years.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
that's it. That's just one of those great stories, isn't it? How you meet someone that is of that world, and you don't really know until they start having a few drinks and letting their hair down, and then it all comes out, right? I mean, what year are we talking here?
Well, let's see. Probably 2000.
Right. Okay.
2000. Yeah, 2000. Because it was just before. Because September 11th. Yeah, it was about a year before that. So about 2000.
Do you want to spill the beans then?
Well, basically, what happened was Dominick. This was Dominick Montiglio.
Yep. One and
And
only.
Dominick. Yep, Dominick was ultimately, like I said, there he is. He's in my house. He's drinking and telling me his stories. And as it starts to unfold, and I start to realize, like, this is a guy with a bounty on his head. This is a guy that, quote unquote, ratted on the mob, so on and so forth. Having known that world in the sense of just a New York guy, like I described, a lot of told a few friends of mine, and they were just like, "What are you, fucking nuts? Why do you got that guy in your house? Like, that's dangerous." You know what I mean? If they find out,
For
they
sure.
come to get him, they're gonna get you too. Or, they were just like, that doesn't, make sense. But now keep in mind that, Dominick's a complex guy, and part of his story, a large part of his story, is that Dominick served in Vietnam.
Right.
He served his country proudly. He had a lot of confirmed kills out there. And in the book, he touched on it briefly, but there was this thing going on where a guy who tried to write a book um, about guys that weren't in Vietnam. It was called Stolen Valor. He couldn't get access to Dominick's information because Dominick had sealed records. And he put them in his book, and Dom had this thing. He says, I got all these people think I wasn't even in the mob. I'm sorry, wasn't even in Vietnam, and it really fucking pisses me off, you know. And and I was helping him. I was taking him to the VA in Brooklyn to, like, get shrapnel taken out of his arm. He had 4 teeth in his head. He needed teeth. I was on the phone with guys he was in the war with. I knew he was for real. You know,
So,
I
Ross,
mean,
at this point, is there any part of you that's thinking, shit, this guy is an ex Gambino family soldier? He testified against, very prominent figures in the Gambino family, namely Nino Gaggi, and probably gave evidence against Paul Castellano as well. So, is there any thought that's going through your mind that this is not a good idea? This could be quite dangerous. Were you worried for your safety or anything like that? Or
well, what I was getting at is my father was a Marine, so, and my uncle served in the Navy. So the fact that he had been also serving in the military, I kind of thought, like, you know what, like, this guy's got a lot of different elements, and I wasn't going to judge him so harshly when he told me the story that Nino tried to have him killed.
yeah,
And he said, I wasn't about to die because of their paranoia.
right,
I sort of understood that. I
sure,
said, I get it. And it's not like we were gallivanting around New York City together. I
yeah,
mean, it
yeah,
was a lot of, we were in the studio, we were making art.
sure,
So in the beginning, I was a little bit, I wouldn't say I was nervous about it, but I just thought, is this a good idea? I don't,
yeah,
I kind of, sure, I thought about it. Yeah, I mean, I'm not, yeah. But at the same time, like I said, I was taking everything into account. I wasn't judging him just on that part of his story, and I was listening to his whole story. And and Dom is like, if you get to know him, he's a good guy. Like, he's a likable person. He's a dynamic person. We were becoming friends. So I just said, you know what? Like, that's part of his past. We're not going to go hang out in Bay Ridge and Bensonhurst,
sure,
like,
sure.
right? We're
Outside the
in, we're
Gemini
in,
Lounge, yeah, not a good place.
right. Like, we're in where we are. So as it unfolded, I told a friend of mine, Billy Sharp, and Billy said, man, you should be interviewing this guy. Like, we should get this on film. And I talked to Dominick about it. I said, I'll tell you what, Dom, you could stay here for as long as you need. At that time, let me back up for a second. At that time, there was a producer that wanted to make. There was a lot of people that wanted to do stuff with Dom. There was a producer in particular that wanted to do a film with him. And I said, you know what, Dom, I'll put you up and take care of your rent or whatever. You give me the life rights to your story, and we'll make a film about it, and we'll be partners. And when we release this thing, we'll each get a cut. And he said, all right, Ross, let's do it. So I became like his, not just like his partner in making this film, but like I became like his sort of agent, if you will. He would call me his Jerry Maguire. He'd go, "You're like my Jerry Maguire, Rossi." So like when Nat Geo or Discovery Channel wanted to meet him, I would set up the situation,
Sure,
and they would come do an interview, and we'd
right,
pick a location, and
got you,
and I started being that to him as well.
right.
So we developed this relationship. And I trusted Dom. And Dom, listen, Dom always had a gun, and Dom, even when he lived with me, and Dom was like, if they ever come for me, they better be ready to shoot it out.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
so I don't know. I always kind of felt like Dom could handle his, and I was smart to make sure we weren't in stupid situations.
I mean, God forbid if there was a situation where someone did come for him and he had to get his gun out. Did you have any sort of backup plan?
No,
Right.
I mean, I didn't have a gun. It was hopefully Dom could shoot straight, but he was an ex-ranger. I mean, he
Right.
was a
Yeah.
Green Beret.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. He's hard to kill. Dom's hard to kill.
Yeah.
And not just by people, by just in his nature. He's been through a lot of shit, and he's one tough son of a bitch. So, and he's not stupid. The reality is most of the guys are either dead or doing life in prison. And the real threat was like maybe some young buck coming up in the life that thought they could catch a guy like Dom out there and make a name for themselves. But, think about it in real life. Is somebody, combing the streets looking for Dominick Montiglio? No,
Sure. Yeah.
just not. Now, like I said, if you showed up in the neighborhood where those guys are at and they seen him on the street, that's different. But we weren't doing that. So,
Right.
you know.
So you start making this film, and it's called The Lynchpin of Bensonhurst. Is that right?
Yeah.
So you've got this massive story. Where do you start? What was your process with Dominick?
The truth is that for a certain amount of time, Dom had a serious drinking problem,
Right.
and you'd have to catch him when he wasn't drinking, because when he was drinking, he would just veer off into these crazy things. And so, but in the beginning, we were just like, let's just turn the mic on and just talk. We didn't have like a structure.
Yeah.
And also, we didn't have, we didn't even really have the right equipment.
Right.
We had like a shitty low definition camera. We didn't have lights. Let's just capture it. So as we started down that road, doing it that way, we then realized like, okay, we got to curtail the drinking. Okay, let's get a better camera. Let's start to like aim at making points. Let's get him to, speak in line with some type of structure. So the beginning was kind of crazy, and then as time went on, yeah, we kind of honed it in, and we didn't want to get the same stuff that everybody had gotten, the things he was indicted for or what was written in Murder Machine, because I was getting to know a completely different Dominick. I was getting to know a much deeper, raw sort of reality about who Dominick was. His family life, what happened with his father, what happened with Nino, what happened with the Dimeo Crew, and all the sort of elements that led him to do the things he did. The hole in the wall gang, all the things that Dom did and what was behind it. I wanted to get into that stuff. And the pain that the man lived with, what it was like for him to end up in that situation, because Dom is a soldier. So when he had to make that choice, that's tortured him for the rest of his life. He never felt good about having to turn on his family, having to play that role that he did. But when the bottom line was, when Nino tried to make Dominick something Dom could never be. And it was a disaster from the beginning. Dom was never going to be able to follow Nino's rules and regulations, and he just wasn't going to be somebody's sidekick. So I was delving into that stuff, and there was a lot of late nights where we were turning, on a camera at 2 a.m. after painting and drinking and
whatever we were doing, and he was opening up, yeah, in ways, I mean, I've seen Dominick shed many a tear. I've seen Dominick get really angry. I've seen Dominick in a lot of mental states that nobody's probably seen, or very few have seen.
Got ya.
So in our documentary, we wanted to show him in a light that nobody had seen him. And again, I also wanted to clear his name of that bullshit with them. He wasn't in the military and all
Right.
that. So
Right.
I wanted to find the guys that were there. I wanted to find the guys that, revered him, and I did. I found the guys that were like, Dom was the best fucking soldier. Dom was our point man. Dom was methodical. They'd give their life for him. Because if you read about people that like commented on the little blurb I put up years ago when we started our documentary, they call him a rat and a scumbag and a heroin addict and all this bullshit. And they don't know. They don't know his story. He was never there. They don't know his story.
I mean, he must have been, after going to the Vietnam War, he must have been tortured from what he saw out there. And then to come back to, Brooklyn and then get involved with the Dimeo Crew, who were pretty much butchers, human butchers, right? I mean, people would walk into the Gemini Lounge, which was the Dimeo Crew headquarters, and they wouldn't come back. They would just disappear, right?
Yep.
So he must have been tortured from that as well. So what was more torturing for him to get hooked up and see the butchering of the Dimeo Crew, or was it Vietnam that affected him more? What was your take on that?
Well, definitely my take is Vietnam did his head in. I mean, Dom was on Hill 875 in Vietnam. Dom lost a lot of guys. He was seeing a lot of death out there. And I know, still to this day that he has severe PTSD from his experiences in Vietnam.
Right.
That did his head in for sure. But at the same time, like there were guys that went during the time of his tenure as a gangster, and even one or two that disappeared through the Gemini Lounge, guys that he was friends with that ended up having to get killed.
Right.
That he had to live with that. He had to, he'll tell you a story about Danny Grillo, for example.
Sure.
And I'll let him sort of describe the whole thing, but it's in our documentary where, Danny had a gambling problem and he was betting down on Mulberry Street with Matty the Horse and he owed money.
Yeah.
And Nino and them tried to straighten it out for him because he owed a lot of money. And they gave him like a pass one time and were like, that's it, Danny, you can't do it again. But Danny went back and got himself in debt to these guys again. And Dominick knew about it, was involved. He was questioned by Nino. And he had to basically say like, yeah, Danny's fucked up. Danny's back at it. And he knew by saying that they were going to do what they had to do.
Right.
And the next thing you know, Danny disappears and Dom's getting calls from Danny's wife.
Oh God.
And Dom knew Danny was at the Gemini and was now probably under 1,000 pounds of garbage at the Fountain Avenue dump.
Wow.
And that he somehow indirectly had to play a role in that, even though he didn't want to. So that's part of the life that these guys get involved in, and as Dom says, like, the one thing people have to realize about gangsters, they kill each other.
Yeah.
Like, gangsters don't run around just killing, and they're not like serial murders just killing random people with no, right? They have their game that they're playing, and that game includes gambling and extortion and racketeering, right? And all those things that they do, and they kill each other. That's what they do.
I mean, Danny Grillo was a serious. He was a hitman himself, right?
Yeah, Danny was a gangster.
Yeah.
Danny was a gangster. Danny knew the rules, and he broke them, and he got killed. So Dom spoke of these things, and Dom was, haunted by these things that had happened, man. I mean, these were friends. These people aren't without emotions. You listen to, like, for example, Sammy the Bull or some of these guys that talk about it. They felt bad, but they did what they had to do because that was the life. It was either them or the other guy. So that's part of what Dom dealt with.
I like you say, I don't think he was cut out for being a gangster. He he was raised by his uncle Nino that wanted him to follow the traditional route, and he was trying to get away from all of that by actually going to Vietnam. That Vietnam was his escape, and that is it's kind of the same story with other mob figures as well. They've gone to Vietnam to try to escape what's going on the streets, and then they come back and they kind of get sucked back into it, and that's kind of what happened to Dominick, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, Dominick actually wanted to be a musician. He went out to Berkeley when he came back. He was a talented musician. Dom's very creative, as you know. As I met him as an artist, and I was involved in his artistic process as well, and seeing what he did there. And I've heard him sing and play music and poetry, whatever. Dom had that in him, and he wanted his uncle to actually help him with that life. They had connections. Dom was in a doo-wop band. Dom.
Right.
No, Dom did not want to be a gangster initially. But what happened was when he came back, he had been a killer.
No.
He had been trained, and Nino used that stuff. He knew he could use that. And Dominick was kind of like, as we just talked about earlier in this interview, that artistic lifestyle doesn't really pay that well for everybody. It's only a select few that actually make it. So everybody else is struggling with it. Dom had a family. He needed to pay the bills. And it always starts out, be my driver, help me do this, take me over there. It seems benign at first in a way. I mean, not that he had blinders on. He knew what he was getting into because he came from a family of Sicilian criminals.
Yeah.
But he was trying to go a different route. But yeah, he just got sucked in slowly but surely, and they used him for what he knew how to do.
I mean, Dominick is a person that was kind of almost, he saw the inner workings of the Gambino family. He was making drop-offs to Paul Castellano. He was obviously in tight with his uncle Nino, and so he saw a lot of the high-level stuff that was going on, in the mob and in the Gambino family in particular. So that's really interesting to get that angle from someone that knows, what's going on with the top guys,
Yeah, no, he was right in there with the top guys, and he was Nino's right hand man. And then Nino would go to Florida, and Dominick would pick up Nino's business dealings, and he was working directly with Roy Dimeo, like you said. He was meeting with Paul Castellano. Dom was there, and Dom wanted to get made at a certain point too. Like Dom felt like he was, in order to actually get made, he had done things that merited that, but Nino didn't want Dom to have that power and that juice, so he tried to keep Dom under his thumb.
That was that was his motto, wasn't it? Keep them down and keep them hungry. That was Nino's motto.
Yeah, it was, but he did that with the wrong guy, because Dom is not the type of guy to stay under another man's thumb too long. Yeah, and then, and listen, Dom was also no angel. Dom liked to party. He loved women. He loved doing blow. He loved drinking. He got into that life with all those other dudes too. They were all doing that type of stuff. So once you're in that life and you're running around and you're getting high and you're getting drunk and you're a gangster and you got money in your pocket, you got power, you got women, you've got that going on, it's a rush. It's addictive, So that was part of, once he was in that, he was in it, and he took it as far as a guy like that could take it, because a guy like Dom, it's like he'll take it to the end. There's no like stop or pause button on those type of guys.
Some people have an addictive personality, right?
Yeah, and Dom has an addictive personality, and all them guys did. I mean, there's no putting pause on that. They get power hungry. Dom used to say, like the Dimeo Crew guys, like he'd go around the Gemini Lounge and he could tell if they killed somebody, because if they did, they'd be all happy and feeling good and up. Great. But if they were like mopey and miserable, he'd be like, they haven't done anything in a little bit.
I mean, just for the viewers that don't know, the Dimeo Crew were probably the most murderous, butchering crew that there ever was in the New York or even the
Oh
American
yeah.
mob, arguably. You know.
Oh, without a doubt. They said that that was basically like a group of serial killers. They had hundreds of murders under their belt that they knew of, and then forget about the ones they didn't know of.
Yeah.
You know, they were all killers. They were like a bunch of young, hungry killers out of, you know, Canarsie and Brooklyn, Flatbush, that area. And yeah, and Dom ran with a bunch of them. He was close with a bunch of them. Um, so yeah, he didn't get made. He wanted to do his own stuff outside the mob, so he formed a little crew, and they were doing their own criminal behaviors, right?
Yeah.
Um, and things that they were not supposed to be doing. Um, a long story short, I would let Dom describe it more than I would. It is in our film, but there was a debt with a guy through cocaine interactions that was connected. Dom was connected. There was a sit down. The guy tried to blame Dominick for it. Nino had told Dom not to get involved in it. There was dissension between Nino and Dominick. Dominick felt like Nino might have him whacked. There were other guys in the Dimeo crew that he was having problems with. There was stuff going on.
Yeah.
So Dom decides to split to go out to California to just get away from it all.
Right.
And then there was a guy that owed him money in New York. And Dom was running around with some whacked out killer from who was on the lam in Canada. And between him and this other girl that was a playmate, they decided to go back to New York and collect on this debt. And when they went to go collect on it, this guy set him up, and that's how Dom got actually arrested and, you know, taken into custody at that time.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So, but he was trying to get away from it, you know. He just couldn't.
And he basically knew that, you know, he was done at that point. Once the cuffs were slapped on him, he was in danger. At the minute that he was taken in, he was in danger. Whether he gave evidence or cooperated or not, he was in danger, right?
Well, sure. But what happened was actually he got locked up at MCC, and he was just going to keep his mouth shut. But what happened was Nino sent a lawyer to get him out. Now Nino had been looking for him, and Dom knew if he took that lawyer and got out, that he was going to get killed.
Right.
So Dom decided, nah, I won't have nothing to do with that. I'm going to stay in jail and handle this on my own.
Right.
And while he was in the joint, there was a guy from uptown in Harlem that he did business with, a black guy that was a friend of his, that said, hey, the words come down, like we heard that they're going to take you out in here. You know,
Wow.
you better watch your back. The Italians are going to get you, whatever it was. And at that point, Dom was sitting in his cell and said, you know what? Like, I'm not getting fucking killed.
Yeah.
Because he hadn't said anything at that point,
No.
but he knew that they were going to have to take him out just because of everything he knew, and just because they were worried he might talk.
Yeah.
They put a contract out on him, and that's when he said, "Fuck it," and he, you know, called the feds and said, "Get me out of here. I'm gonna, you know, I think I got something to talk to you about."
This is usually the way, isn't it? You don't actually have to cooperate, but if you're in a situation where they think that you could possibly cooperate, that's when you're done, right? I mean, that's
Absolutely. I mean, that's where, you know, that's why when you get locked up, you know, you're either going to go one way or the other. I mean,
yeah.
You might take your chances. It depends. Like, there's guys, like stand-up guys that get locked up, that if they don't have that type of beef in the street with everybody, they will do their time because they'll actually gain more power in prison.
Yeah.
And they'll be able to withstand that scenario. But he was already on the quote-unquote lam from the mob.
Yeah.
He was already kind of a wanted man anyway.
Yeah.
So the minute he got wrapped up, he had to make that decision, life or death. And, you know, what people don't realize is, you know, these guys that flip, like, let's look at Sammy, right? Sammy flipped because John Gotti flipped on him. He betrayed him first.
Yeah.
So what's he going to do? Spend his life in jail for some fucking guy that wants to have him killed anyway, or was betraying him? It's the same thing. Dominick knew Nino wanted to have him dead, and Nino had destroyed his life. You know, Nino literally had used him up in every way he could, and wanted to control him, and he couldn't control him. So Dom said, you know what, I'm not going out for this guy. Like I'm not doing it.
Right.
And when he described that to me back then, that's why I went down that road with him, because, you know, from where I was standing, I said, you know what, I understand it. Like, I'm not in the mob. I'm not going to sit there and judge you and say you're a rat.
Yeah.
You deserve to die. Who the fuck am I? I'm some like whacked out artist from New York, you know, doing what I'm doing, and I'm meeting this guy, and I'm just taking him for who he is, who's he presenting. You know, he's telling me the truth, and he's saying, this is my story. This is how I got here. And I said, you know what? All right, like, I accept you for who you are. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not judge and jury.
Absolutely. So, so you've made this film called Lynchpin of Bensonhurst, and it's fantastic, by the way. For viewers, if you haven't seen it, do please check it out, and maybe Ross can inform you of where you can actually check this film out, and what the situation is with the film.
Well, interestingly enough, you know, we're still working on releasing this film. Ultimately, we had gotten involved in a situation with a distribution scenario with some guys in LA that turned out to be pretty crooked, to be honest with you. Ourselves and many other filmmakers got caught up in a scenario where these guys were like acting like middlemen to help us distribute our film, disappeared. We had been on iTunes for some time. We had to take our film off of iTunes, and we are currently, as we speak, looking for a platform to distribute our film, whether it would be Netflix or Amazon Prime or Hulu. So part of why I wanted to do this interview with you was to get that word out there. And, you know, we put a little clip out years ago that has over almost 40,000 views. People are gagging at the bit to see the film in full. And I'm looking to find the venue for it. So it's not like they could just go out there actually and see it yet. Hopefully, after people hear this interview with me and then with Dominick, and they want to see it, we can find a way to get it to them. And I'll certainly be in touch with you to do that. But what I can say is it's a view into a guy like Dominick that nobody on planet Earth has ever gotten from a gangster.
Absolutely.
I lived with him for 2 years.
Yeah.
He became a very tight friend of mine. So what he disclosed in this film is personal.
Yeah.
It's a life story that nobody got before. And to be honest with you, I actually have a second film that can't be released until Dom is not even around, because it's a story beyond the story. It's things that can't be told.
Wow.
So when I say that to tell you that even in what I did release, it's never been heard before. Some of the things in there have never been heard before, and there's even more. But I promised Dominick, you know, till his dying day that stuff would never get out until he's given me permission. Once he's not alive anymore, if I'm alive, it'll get out, and people could see some things that really never were heard about before. But yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff. If you're into the mob and that lifestyle, or just fascinated by what had happened with Dominick and his trials and tribulations, you'll be fascinated to see our film, The Lynchpin of Bensonhurst.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I was doing some research and looking for people to get on the show, I actually thought back to a book I'd read, I think it was 10 years ago, called Murder Machine, like as you mentioned. And that book just blew me away. And to hear Dominick's story of how close he was to the Dimeo Crew, I mean, this was a Murder Machine crew. And, you know, I actually thought, well, to get a guy like that on the show, to hear his story, and you know, it'd be absolutely fantastic. And I'm sure the viewers would love to hear his story, because you know, it's a part of history, right? At the end of the day.
Oh, without a doubt, he's definitely a part of that whole history and that genre, and he'll surprise people. He's surprising. Dominick is a very multifaceted character. He's much deeper than a lot of the guys, the goombas that just were gangsters. Dominick was a lot of things. He is a lot of things. And even if you look at his art, I mean, his art is this culmination of this life that he lived. It's his demons, it's his dreams, his fantasies, his past, all coming together in this sort of collage. And I was always fascinated through that too, because I spent, hundreds of hours in a studio with him while he worked. So
Sure.
it's like that was really what was interesting too, was like how all this stuff fed his artwork, you
Yeah.
know.
Fantastic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some details about the Lynchpin of Bensonhurst in the description of this video. So do please check that out, and do check out Ross's site, which I'll also put as a link. It's fantastic having you on, and hopefully we'll have some more interviews lined up.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.